On July 22, 1975, the Apollo-18 capsule docked with the Soyuz 19 capsule. When the astronauts first encountered each other in space, they exchanged warm greetings and symbolic gifts, ushering in a new era of cooperation between the United States and Soviet Union, leading to many new opportunities for exploration and discovery. The scientific work they did was profound, giving scientists the ability to exchange knowledge all around the world. But the social work led us into an era where 16 nations could cooperate to build the International Space Station and beyond.
The late 1960s and early 70s were a period of détente in the Cold War, created by agreements that enhanced the scientific cooperation of the US and the USSR, and public discussions between their leaders. The science progress was made through promoting exchange of knowledge from meteorological satellites and cooperation to launch more. Space cooperation assists countries involved by easing the economic burden on each country, and allows countries to utilize technologies that they do not possess to allow for more advanced exploration. The mission started in October 1970, as the first American delegates, led by George Low, the administrator of NASA, arrived in Moscow to meet with the Russian delegation, led by Mstislav Keldysh. This was at a time when the US and the USSR were engaged in a proxy war in Vietnam, and America was in the midst of an active lunar program, with astronauts who had walked the moon less than 6 months prior. The American delegates' mission was to begin the cooperation between the United States and Soviet Union in space to end the space race. During the delegation's trip to Moscow, there was civil unrest following the bombings carried out by the Jewish Defense League on Soviet targets in response to a trial in the USSR, which the American public perceived to have anti-Semitic overtones. Immediately upon the delegation's entry into the airport, the Americans met with Boris Nikolaevich Petrov and his colleagues. Then the Americans and their hosts were up to Zvezdny Gorod, Star City, the cosmonaut training center. Following a brief greeting ceremony, the Americans were taken to the simulation facility where the cosmonauts practiced flight procedures. This was the first of many meetings between the Soviets and Americans, where the two groups worked together. And thus began the many years of exchange of technology and knowledge between the US and the USSR. Once again, it appeared that the desire to cooperate in space exploration outweighed any extraneous political events, according to George Low.
The partners decided not to use existing space stations from the Soviet Union or United States because the equipment was too complex, and neither side wanted to give up too much classified information about their current space projects. Instead, for the first international docking of vessels in space, they used the existing Apollo and Soyuz capsules and adapted them for maneuvers and science experiments. The final plans for this cooperative mission were approved in April of 1972, when Leonid Brezhnev and Richard Nixon signed the Agreement Concerning Cooperation in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space for Peaceful Purposes. The Americans were less uncomfortable with the aforementioned trials conducted by the Soviet Union, and after meetings between Nixon and Brezhnev, citizens from both countries were more able to see commonalities rather than differences between the two superpowers. Mikhail Schwarzman was a politically involved resident of the Soviet Union at the time.
Actually, I think after Americans landed on the moon, Soviet Union realized that they're not necessarily the leaders in the space exploration anymore, and so there was more willingness to negotiate.
There was also a situation posed that if some astronauts were stuck in space, the most the other country could do was watch, so they needed to develop compatible docking mechanisms. The agreement that the two leaders signed stated the US and USSR agree to enhance cooperation in outer space by utilizing the capabilities of both countries for joint projects of mutual benefit. Finally, the Apollo-Soyuz mission was on track for a launch. In the first half of 1973, both countries announced who would be flying this landmark mission. The United States announced Vance Brand, Donald Slayton, and the commander, Thomas Stafford, who had pioneered docking in space. And the USSR announced Valery Kubasov and Alexei Leonov, who was the first man to walk in space. During the 3-year period in which they worked together on the space mission, the engineers and staff explored and exchanged each other's cultures and technologies. The Americans, at first, were shocked when they encountered equipment from the Soviet side that was much simpler than the equipment the Americans were using. They were astonished how much the Soviets could accomplish with this equipment. after these years full of intensive work from both sides, readying for the mission. Finally, on July 15th of 1975, Soyuz 19 was launched, followed by Apollo 18 just 7.5 hours later. The two commanders docked the capsules, and the mission became a joint one, with Leonov and Stafford opening the hatch between the two nations. They shook hands, ending the space race.
This occasion was so momentous that President Ford called the space explorers directly, and Brezhnev sent a letter with the cosmonauts to the entire crew. What they said was broadcasted worldwide.
New possibilities are opening up for fruitful development of scientific cooperation between countries and the peoples in the interests of peace and progress of all humanity.
And I'm confident that the day is not far off when space missions made possible
by this first joint effort will be more or less commonplace.
This mission launched years of cooperation between the two countries. Many new cooperative missions have been launched since Apollo-Soyuz. For example, Deep Space One and ExoMars. Cooperative explorations of Mars were launched in October 1998 and March 2016. Russia, Argentina, Brazil, India, New Zealand, Norway, Denmark, Pakistan, Spain, the United Kingdom, Canada, and France have all taken part in cooperative space missions. Some countries that have cooperated in such work are bitter enemies like Pakistan and India. The US and the USSR provided a great example for such cooperation. Still today, the cooperation between the United States and Russia keeps tensions in check. Collaboration allowed for an increased level of knowledge passed between countries. The Apollo spacecraft worked in unison with the Soyuz capsule to create the first ever man-made eclipse, so that the Soviet team could explore the sun's corona. American astronauts also carried out the first generation of stratospheric aerosol measurements, or SAM. This experiment helped scientists better understand what was happening with the Earth's climate, and the information gained could be exchanged with climate and atmospheric scientists all over the world. This was the first data gathered on aerosols and their effect on the environment, and laid the groundwork for international climate modeling, leading to better data about what our climate will look like in the future. Following generations of the SAM experiment even helped identify the hole in the ozone. The astronauts also exchanged knowledge with the general public and filmed experiments to be shown live to people all around the world to spark their interest in science and in symbiosis between countries.
This mission did not end the Cold War, but it eased the existential threat of war that many people in both countries feared. It also opened the way for civilian technology development.
Competition then moved more to the realm of civilian technology like computers and computer networks, where, for example, the United States took a lead in the 1970s, or about in the beginning of the 1970s, started to develop what we today know as the Internet.
Gerald Ford and Leonid Brezhnev hit it right on the head with their sentiments about the future of space travel. Less than a quarter century later, because of the bright new future this long mission revealed, cooperative missions in space were commonplace, and the International Space Station, the most expensive man-made object, was under construction, with parts, launches, and astronauts from 16 countries and over 136 missions to space. All of the work in space that we do today is enabled by international cooperation. The Americans currently rely on our relationship with Russia to get us to space in their Soyuz capsule. The Apollo-Soyuz mission broke the barrier that kept countries from working together in space. It gave body to George Low's message that scientific collaboration can leap any barrier, any bound. As a human race, we now have the ability to explore further and exchange even more knowledge.